ours will perform in this basis, and how, for example, we can solve this problem, or we can at least minimize it as a developing situation in our region. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else? Заповядайте. Мартин.
Can you hear me? Can you hear me now? Yes. Yes, I apologize for that. First of all, I would like to about going from the vacant spaces at the State Department you mentioned. While you were talking about that, I had the words of General James Mattis, while still serving in the Army, and he was quoted as saying that if you're gonna cut the budget of the State Department, you're gonna have to buy me more bullets. Now, in that context, and going back to the Iran deal, do you think that in the current context it's possible to realistically talk about a better deal being negotiated, even with a businessman in the White House? And wouldn't his approach of disruption actually be more disruptive than he can anticipate? Thank you.
Okay, anyone else? Заповядайте. Авраам.
Благодаря. Казвам се Йосиф Аврамов, финансист съм. Имам два въпроса. Вие наистина сте един от големите приятели на България и няма български държавник и политик, който не се е срещал с вас, и много сте направили за българската кауза. Има две неща, които все още би могло да съдействате. На първо място да се увеличат американските инвестиции в България и на второ място да отпаднат визите, които е доста срамно страна вече 13 години член на НАТО и 11 години член на Европейския съюз да има визи за Съединените щати. Благодаря.
Благодаря. Не виждам. Има още една вдигната ръка. Не, я да преминем към отговорите. Ще преминем към отговорите сега. David, you have the floor. Up to you.
Thank you. So here comes the second speech. So I'll work backwards. The gentleman about visa waiver. As Ambassador Poptadorova knows, this is an issue which we share in common, and Bulgaria is not alone. Poland was another very good example of a country that felt it had deployed troops in Iraq and Afghanistan, etc., was not being treated fairly. We have been a strong and consistent supporter of extending the visa waiver program to countries like Bulgaria and Poland. So we're together on that. The gentleman in the back there, is a better deal possible, I think was the essence of your question. Is that right? Yeah. I don't know. I know two things, and they're in contradiction with each other. I know on the one hand that there is no appetite outside of the United States except in Israel and except in the Sunni Arab world to revisit this deal. The appetite there is quite high. And notwithstanding, by the way, what Ehud Barak may think. And with great respect to Ehud Barak, great respect, tremendous respect, he is not the Prime Minister of Israel. There's only one Prime Minister at a time. And whether it's Tsipras in Greece or Netanyahu in Israel or Borisov in Bulgaria, one cannot, I think, frame an argument by, well, but look at the people who oppose it. They have their own reasons for opposing it. some of which may be strategic, some of which may be political, some of which may be positioning. All of these things are elements, especially when you have two such fierce political competitors over many years as Barak and Netanyahu. But having said that, so on the one hand, you have the bulk of the world, principally Europe, Russia, and China, who have no interest in reopening this, no appetite for reopening the deal. But on the other hand, and here I want to try and speak, if I may, objectively, if there's such a thing today, the deal is flawed. The deal is flawed. And we can either pretend it's not, and we can wait 6, 8, 10, 12 years when there'll be other political leaders in power who then have the responsibility, who then have to make the decisions, or, in the case of President Trump, a politician who says, I'm not going to hand it to my successors. The deal is flawed. Better to deal with it now if we can than to wait 10 years when Iran has, by the way, the authorized pathway to nuclear capability. Why is the deal flawed? Number one, because the deal does not restrict ballistic missile development. The best that the P5+1 could come up with was vague language in a Security Council resolution which calls upon, the exact words, am I correct, Ambassador? Which calls upon Iran. When I was a child, my mother called upon me to do my homework every day. I listened to her about 30% of the time. She called upon me to eat broccoli and spinach. I preferred hamburgers and French fries. Called upon is not a particularly powerful message in the diplomatic arsenal of vocabulary. Or requires, but the words were called upon. Why is Iran building and developing a long-range ballistic missile system? It's not for weather and communication satellites. Why are they building it? The answer should be obvious, number one. Number two, the deal did nothing whatsoever about Iran's regional behavior. Iran today is a stronger, more muscular, more emboldened player in the Middle East than it was 2 years ago or 4 years ago. That's a fact. And the Shiite axis from Lebanon to Syria, to Iraq, to Iran, to Yemen, and including Hezbollah, is getting stronger, not weaker, and it has a patron called Russia. It's a fact. Iran is funding Hezbollah, Hamas, and other terror groups. It's a fact. And I will tell you, because I was there, in a room about this size, with the leaders of the United States negotiating the deal. The leaders, not their representatives, the leaders, who said to us in trying to convince us, we believe that Rouhani, the president of Iran, may be the next Mikhail Gorbachev. We believe that Zarif, the foreign minister of Iran, may be the next Edward Shevardnadze. And we and our CIA believe that the $100 to $150 billion in Iranian frozen assets that will be unfrozen, according to our analyses, will go for domestic infrastructure in Iran to catch up with the needs and expectations of the Iranian people. Wrong, 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 and wrong. So having said that, and by the way, I'll add one more thing. There is increasing circumstantial evidence that Iran and North Korea are collaborating. That the International Atomic Energy inspectors in Iran are not in North Korea. By the way, in Iran, under the deal, cannot inspect Iranian military sites. Correct? They cannot inspect Iranian military sites. What's happening on those military sites? Why do we see North Korean delegations in Iran and Iranian delegations in North Korea? How much of Iran's nuclear program and ballistic program have been outsourced to North Korea? And let's remember, North Korea has been an actor in the Middle East before. I cite only one example, the Syrian nuclear reactor, which the Israelis discovered and shared the intelligence with President Bush and Condoleezza Rice. The Americans refused to act. Israel destroyed the reactor. Imagine for a moment if Israel had not destroyed the nuclear reactor of Assad. How would the Syrian civil war have looked? So that was North Korean built. So the question, for me, the practical question to your question, sir, is between these two poles of destroying them, as Donald Trump said at the United Nations, potentially, or doing nothing and living with it, the policy options are very few and they're extremely difficult, messy, and unpredictable. But doing nothing can't be an option. My granddaughter lives in California. I'm actually beginning to think about what it means to have a granddaughter who lives within the nuclear reach of Kim Jong-un. And I don't mean to personalize it, but it's no longer abstract. Further to the Iran deal, Moni, I want to put out another possibility, that Iran does not violate the deal, that Iran sticks with the deal. And in a way, our prediction was Iran will stick with the deal. Why shouldn't they? The deal has essentially given them a legal pathway by 2030, if not sooner, to nuclear capability. And may I remind us that the original negotiating formula of the P5+1 led by the United States was dismantle for dismantle. Dismantle Iran's nuclear infrastructure, Natanz, Parchin, and the other locations. Dismantle it. And in turn, we dismantle the sanctions which brought them to the table in the first place. The negotiating strategy changed. There was no announcement, and suddenly the strategy became delay for dismantle. We're buying time in the hopeful belief that in the next 10 to 15 years, something can change. Another green revolution. Who knows? And we all can hope. But what if nothing changes? What if the regime remains in power? The Kims have remained in power in North Korea since the end of the war. 3 generations. What if nothing changes? So the question is, and I don't have the answer. It's easier to ask the question than to answer it. The deal itself is imperfect. Many will argue it's much better than nothing. But the reality is that with the deal, there is still a pathway to the bomb. It's likely delayed. And around the deal, you see the activities of Iran. Are we going to meet again in 25 years and say, the Clinton administration got it wrong for 8 years, the Bush administration got it wrong for 8 years, the Obama administration got it wrong for 8 years, as we now do on North Korea? I don't have the answer, but the questions can't be ignored, and there are too many people, and please forgive me, particularly in Europe, not to mention Moscow and Beijing, who would rather, for now, bury the question. I think that covers the issues.
you don't mention nothing this time about...
Oh, I'm sorry, there was a question about Turkey as well.
Ah,
I'm
okay.
sorry, sir. So, go ahead. I'll come to Turkey.
Okay, just, you don't mention nothing about the Israeli-Palestinian peace process. Do you believe still on this or not yet?
So, first to the gentleman about Turkey, and then where is it? Thank you. I understand that I'm standing in a country that shares a border with Turkey, which will not disappear anytime soon or change anytime soon, and geography is very determinative of outlook and policy. I understand that. I will tell you, it's not a secret that we first went to Ankara in early 2003, 14 years ago, and met with the new Prime Minister of Turkey, Erdogan, in his office for 90 minutes. We were a group of about 10.